Comedy's Best Kept Secret Tour Podcast. I'm Dan Friedman. I'm here with Deep Fried Man.
Call me Daniel.
Yeah, I want to know that. Daniel Friedman.
Daniel Friedman.
Yeah.
Otherwise known as his stage name, Deep Fried Man.
Which is where the name comes from. Well, that's who I'm interviewing, though, is Deep Fried Man.
Yes. He's a good performer. He likes to speak in the third person.
So what's going on, man? I met you in Boxburg.
Do you know what's cool is that because mainly American people are going to watch this, I assume.
Yeah.
And they're not going to know.
No, nobody's going to watch this. Don't worry.
Okay, good. because I can only assume that that if people from America watch this, they won't know how bad it is to be in Boxburg.
No, I think this should drive some South Africans to the thing. I'm trying to build a little South African fan base. That's sort of the goal.
Where's the equivalent of Boxburg in? Are you from New York?
Yeah. There's no place that's that close to the center of the city that is that bad.
I suppose because New York, of all the places in America, would be like the least inbred part of America.
Yeah, but then there's like Utica or like Syracuse, places. So I always have this bit about how there's a town outside of every town that you live in that has a shitty name. And you just have to find what that town is when you go play a new town. And for here, it's Boxburg and Breckpan.
And that same joke will work wherever you
everywhere.
go. No, that's very true.
As long as you figure out.
That's very true. But if you lived in certain parts of America, like Missouri, it would be a lot easier for you to find.
It's so much closer. Yeah. It's not even that it's easier. It's just closer. It's like it's way more. It just depends on how far out you have to go before you find the one. So even in Syracuse, there are suburbs within that were worse. So I was from Baldwinsville, and the one that we used to make fun of was Solvay, and so we'd make up rumors. We would be like, "Oh, well, in Solvay they eat cats."
Which is funny as well because I always grew up in what is known as the northern suburbs.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the more well-to-do area.
Sure.
And I always used to think of the East Rand as being really dodgy. Now, Boxburg's part of the East Rand.
Okay.
But there's other areas of the East Rand like Bedford View, which are actually quite fancy areas.
Okay.
But to us, it was all the same thing. So if someone said to me, I'm from Bedford View, I would judge that person.
As the East, the East
Whereas
Rand.
if you're from Bedford View, you're going to judge people from Edenville. And you're right, it always does work that way.
Yeah.
And it's just like...
It's a human condition.
It's a cycling of judging, and then where would it end? And the
We
the worst place in the world.
Yeah, because we just want to be the best.
But there must be someone who lives in the place.
Or I guess we don't want to be the best. We want to not be the worst.
We want to not be the worst. It's definitely that.
That's the whole thing.
It's definitely that. You just want to know that there's someone worse off than you.
So here's what happens. When you find the place that is the worst place, they admit it. So I'll play the worst place like in St. Louis. It's a place called Festus.
Yeah.
And I'll make fun of Festus to Festus people, and they don't have a retort because they're like, "You're right, this is terrible."
You're right. Yeah, they've embraced it in a way because they can't really claim there's a worse place.
So in
than
Boxburg, I feel like that was the vibe.
I don't know.
They knew they were the worst.
I don't know. That is quite accurate, but I would say there are some steps down from Boxburg.
Okay.
There would be Breckpan.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to use.
That is a step down from Boxburg.
So what happens in
quite
Breckpan?
nice
What's the identifying factors of Breckpan?
Well, the things that people would talk about in comedy would be, the usual incest, bad teeth.
Is it really happening, or is
drugs?
It just yeah.
I don't know if it's happening. I don't know if it's happening because who knows? Because I'm from Johannesburg and you're from New York, so maybe we're just elitist snobs who assume that people who come from areas which are less well-known than ours or less well-to-do.
But that's to assume that no one fucks their cousin and no one does drugs, and that's not true.
Yeah, I was just being I was being on the generous side.
That's what I mean.
They probably are fucking their cousins in Breckpan. I just want to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, it's got to come from somewhere. Yeah.
So I seem like a better person.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked how you framed everything. You called your area the well-to-do. You're not calling yourself rich. Yeah, I like this. But now you've grouped me. As long as you've grouped me, then we can be snobs together. I like that. That was beautiful. I like that. Okay, so you have can I talk about this? You have a day job.
I do have a day job,
so
and
you've come
that's
into
very
this
recent.
thing differently.
I haven't come into this thing differently because since 2011, I started comedy in 2010.
Yeah.
And since 2011, I've been a professional comedian, no day
shit.
job. So the day job that I've got now, I've been there 2 months, and that's the first day job I've had in 8 years.
So it's not. So when I met
so
you,
I'm not like the day job comedian. I'm a comedian who now is the day job comedian
and
for
why?
the first time.
Why is that?
For a number of reasons. I've got a kid.
Yeah, it helps.
So do you know what the thing is? There have been times
when
when comedy has been very kind to me in terms of the fact that I've made probably more money from it at that time than I could have made doing anything else.
I will say, from the standpoint of I'm hanging out with a lot of the right comedians and the comedians that people know in this country, but for some reason, every time you're somewhere, as you're walking in the room, there's always people going, "Oh, that's Deep Fried Man." They know you. They know your face.
I'd like to think so, which is cool. But I think the thing is that the thing is, in a way, do you have kids?
No.
Okay, so
I'm a godparent. Does that count?
That is amazing because you can really just
pour
leave. Water over the kid's head and then leave, And if it gets pneumonia, it's not your problem.
Yeah, well, I wasn't there for that. What are you talking about? Yeah.
But the thing is, it's like I really envy a lot of comedians. Comedy is not a career which lends itself to stability, especially with the traveling. And so I find a lot of comedians will be in their 40s and 50s without ever having settled down.
Right.
And I really envy that because, I'm not saying that I don't love my wife or that I don't love my kids.
She's never going to watch this. It's fine.
Fuck, I hate them both. They're awful. They're awful. I can't escape. No, it's not that. It's just, I think there's that thing of whatever your life is, you kind of envy the other side of it. And there's really that freedom. Imagine like waking up at noon.
I don't have to imagine this.
Comedy. That's your life.
You're describing my day.
That was my life once.
Wait, go on with the thing. Imagine.
That freedom is amazing. You wake up whenever you want. Yep. You don't have to care about work until you're at the club at night. And even then, it doesn't really seem like work. People are having a good time. You're with friends.
This is my life.
After your show, you can have fun and party, and then you wake up the next day and you do it all again.
That's my life.
Well, that's not my life. I wake up every morning at 6 a.m, and I guess what that means is that you don't have that freedom of like. Also, the other freedom of not having attachments is that you can be broke.
Right. You're right. Nobody because you're not going to judge yourself.
No, and it's not even that. It's the fact that my life now.
You're responsible for other people.
I need to have an X amount of money just to survive because I've got a bond, which is what we call a mortgage.
Yeah.
I've got a son who at some point is going to need to be educated.
Right. Well, he needs food as well.
Yeah. I've got, so your life becomes such that it's like, I can't earn less than a certain amount. Right. And with comedy,
or people
it's like
will die.
I had some nerve-wracking months last year, and then I was just like,
I don't want to be in this position again.
Yes, and at the same time, comedy had become a bit of a job for me, you know what I mean? And it's like, I've been feeling so free since I got the day job, which is not what you'd expect, but I feel free in terms of my comedy in that I can say no to gigs if I don't want to do them.
You're in a beautiful position, right? Because you don't have to, sorry, I got distracted when someone was on the wall. I forgot what my point was. But
I don't have to suck dick for.
You don't have to suck dick for. No, you don't have to develop your skill set or your name. You're already there, right? So it's like to get the day job once you're established, it's a little easier. Like you don't have to do the struggle part of comedy anymore because you already did it.
Well, what I'd like to think is like I think I've been through some periods in comedy where I'll say yes to literally anything.
Right.
And I think now I feel I've got the luxury of saying I only want to do these gigs. Right. You know, and I think that's a great space to be in.
Right. So that's where the having the day job works and it fits in with the lifestyle.
And also now I feel like comedy is a release for me again. Yeah. When it's a job, it stops feeling like a release. Whereas comedy at its best, it's like you feel relieved after you get on stage. It's like almost like scratches an itch.
Right. Yeah. There's this thing of like when I travel and I travel to other countries where I might not have, like I was in London for a week before and I wasn't able to get any spots until the week that I go back, and so I didn't do comedy for a week and a half, and then I got out here. And it feels terrible.
Yeah, it's like tenseness.
There's no catharsis.
Yeah. And so now I feel I've got the catharsis, but I don't have the stress. And also, I expected to hate my day job, but it turns out by some weird freak of nature, I love doing it.
Can we talk about it? You work at a...
I'm a news editor of a newspaper.
Now yesterday that some guy walked into a newspaper in Maryland.
Yeah, no, I heard 5 people were shot. Yeah. So now that's my job to know exactly what's happening all over the world, mainly South Africa, because we are a very South African-centric publication. But I mean, obviously, as journalists, we heard about that. But that was messed up. And did you know they put out a publication the next day? I thought that was incredible.
Okay, I wasn't sure what you were going to say. I wasn't sure if you were going to say that was insensitive or that was whatever. But like you got to do when you have to.
It's like you have to. But I think if they didn't put out a publication the next day, no one would have been like, "You lazy bastards!"
Okay,
like 5 of their colleagues were gunned down. So I'm saying, to me, it's a symbol. To me, it's a symbol of like that's real journalistic grit. You know, that vibe of like 5 of us have been killed, but we're going to get up and do it tomorrow morning.
Right.
I mean, that was really impressive.
That's the journal. I mean, I mean, that's what I loved about the Newsroom, the Aaron Sorkin show.
It's like
that's the thing. It took me a long time to identify what I loved so much about Aaron Sorkin when other people didn't, and it was that every character that he writes is in love with their profession.
Yeah.
And I relate to that.
Yeah, no, I with the West Wing as well. It's
no matter what's going on, they have to make sure that the duty that they're responsible for gets done.
And in a way, that would also be a big criticism that people would level against him. Like that was a criticism that I had of the West Wing, which is that it's a great, gripping, amazing show, but I was like, there's no universe in which politicians would give a fuck this much.
Right.
You know what I mean? He always gave this sense.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly
everybody,
what you're saying.
and
everyone
each person has their own moral responsibility.
And each person cares about their job and has a really deep moral compass. And I
Yeah.
just thought that's so unrealistic.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's the part, right? I guess that's the part.
I always used to see the administration in West Wing as being like what a presidential administrative
supposed to be
would be in its best case scenario. Yeah, that's how I
talk about this a lot. This idea that the difference between what a word is by definition and what it is in practice, that gap is the humanity part.
Oh yeah,
so
absolutely.
It's like everything that we think democracy is supposed to be, and then what it ends up becoming.
And in politics, that's the hugest gap. I can't think of any profession where there's as huge a gap.
And not even profession, but every word has that. I mean, love. Every word has the gap of what would monogamy,
what its ideal is,
what it's supposed to be, and
what
then what
its
it ends
ideal
up becoming.
is and what it becomes.
Honesty.
Monogamy is
the
an
big
interesting
one.
one.
Honesty is the big one because everybody in relationships thinks that they don't need to tell each other the main
And then that relates to fidelity as well. It's like, is the only form of infidelity to have a physical affair,
right?
Or where does it draw the line?
Right.
Like is watching porn an form of infidelity? Is having a crush on someone but not telling your or like you've got a crush on someone, you don't tell your wife about it, but you start thinking about them.
And this is
all
a
the
big
time.
debate, right?
So
well, because you went and then not talking about it,
telling your wife
builds
about it.
And then now you're having sex with this person at the office Christmas party. Like this is a very specific theory I have.
But do you think it's a form of infidelity even if it doesn't reach that final stage of sex at the office Christmas party?
My problem is that I entered an open relationship last year with this exact goal in mind, which is if you got a crush on somebody, then you tell me.
Yeah.
And then we talk about it. And then maybe it dies right there. Maybe
is that like polyamory, or is it more just like openness about feelings?
It is tough, right? Because polyamory, I think, is more related to everyone being involved in the same group of other relationships, right?
Okay.
Versus an open relationship for what I designed with this woman that I was doing this with. What we designed was just be honest about everything. And so my struggle was that I was starting a comedy tour. I met her right at the cusp of starting a comedy tour. I was going to be gone for 90 days, where I had a bunch of sort of like surface level relationships that I knew I was going to be involved in along the way that could lead to sex and hooking up and things like
this. And so you don't want a situation where you have to constantly live in guilt or shame or
right. And then I also didn't want to maybe live my life differently. Because it wasn't, and she decided that it wasn't fair to me being put in this position now that we like each other. We just met each other.
I like this woman. Right.
And to say, hey, you can't do these things.
Janine, are you watching this?
Melissa, actually, yeah.
No, I'm talking to my wife.
Oh, your own wife.
Open relationships, baby. They work.
Well, he's going to bring me home and we'll work it out. No, but there really was. I mean, we tried to remove jealousy and those in possession from a relationship.
And did it work?
It did to a certain extent, but then we hit a battle, and then because we were so open with things, what happened was I felt like she made a decision on our behalf without me, and I felt like that broke the rules.
So it's almost like I'm going to be completely honest to someone. What could possibly go wrong?
Right. Well, what goes wrong is what goes wrong is as soon as you find out what the dishonesty is, then you go, well, you broke the rules of the relationship.
Because it's almost impossible to live in complete honesty. Do human beings have the capability of doing?
Well, we were honest, and that was the thing, right? So the problem was that so every other decision that we had made up to that point, we did together.
Yeah.
Now she made a decision on her own about what we were doing collectively.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's one thing to say, well, this is what's going to work for me, but it wasn't that. It was more like, this is what we need to do to move forward. And for me, it was like, well, that's not, this should have been a 6-hour discussion together when you first were hurt or whatever the thing was, so that we make the decision as a team.
I feel like I've gone too deep into this relationship with you. I feel like I'm in your bedroom now. I feel like I'm lying in bed, and then she's on the one side, you're on the other side. And
jerking us off?
No, I'm not jerking you off. We're just talking honestly about our feelings.
No one. Don't talk about your feelings in bed. You sit down at a table like an adult.
Okay. What is that where it can go wrong? Is it
No, because I've been in plenty of relationships where it's like you get in that mode, and then what happens is you just solve it in the bedroom, but then you find out you never solved it
because you solve it in the end through sex.
Right.
Because through talking honestly, you're like, oh, I've never been so open with anyone before.
Right.
Nah, I'm so hard right now. And then you have sex, and then
Right.
afterwards you think that the sex has cured the relationship.
and then the problem's still there at the other side. Yeah.
Man, this is deep.
Yeah. Well,
You should be a couples therapist.
Because I thought you were gonna say you should be the host of a podcast. What is it that you do with your wife that makes it so successful?
I think what makes our relationship so successful is that I just do exactly what she wants all the time.
That's one of the tricks, isn't it?
No, well, like for instance, we have compromise in our relationship. For instance, when it came to kids, I was like, I don't really want to have kids.
Really?
And she was like, I do want to have kids, and so we compromised and had kids. So that sort of thing.
That's meeting in the middle. Yeah, I see that.
That sort of thing.
That's the hard part. There's no real meeting in the middle on that one. Aside from adopting a 16-year-old.
That is
like
a hard
that's
one.
like
Do you know
what
makes it work? Is Janine really has strong ideas about what she wants in life, and I always
you have
sit
none?
on the fence and have no. I never know what I want. So she's like, "Let's do this," and I'm like,
"Well, okay." So this is sort of a symptom. It's a symptom of being a comedian. This is the thing I argue all the time: is that comedians can argue either side. We don't really care. We see the world for what it is.
It is hard, and it is true, and it's a hard thing. I've always envied people who are so sure about what they believe. You know what I mean? Because if you don't have that, you get accused of being like sitting on the fence, being airy-fairy, not, you know what I mean? It's like, and there are a lot of things that I'm like that about. Yeah. For instance, I'm quite on the left in terms of all of my ideas.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's an element of the right which I can relate to, which is their whole thing of like you should be able to say whatever you want.
Sure.
And there's such a thing as being too woke and going too far in terms of being too.
I don't feel like the right is using woke that often.
The word woke.
Yeah, I don't think they're using that word.
I'm
That's a left word.
But it's weird. It's like it's weird to have that thing of you can see from a distance that I'm definitely on the left.
Yeah.
And I definitely don't support the right, but I can see their humanity and the sort of like basis of what they believe.
And I think that's the comedic aspect.
And understand it.
Is this again? It's this ability to look at everything, because we have to look at everything objectively. That's
Sarah
the whole
Silverman,
thing.
That's a lot of what Sarah Silverman's latest show was about. She did the show where she was like, I don't get Trump supporters.
Yeah.
But because of that, I'm going to sit down and talk to as many Trump supporters and see what I can find in common with them.
Yeah.
And what's quite interesting about the show is that she never ever finds common ground with them politically.
Yeah.
But what she does realize is she can find common ground with them about other things.
Right.
You know, like what can we talk about? Like have this heated argument about politics, and then you realize, wow, I like Simon and Garfunkel.
Right. Yeah. How's that? Right. How's that possible that we
both
love Hall and Oates?
Hall and Oates. You know what I mean? So that sort of thing. Like that, there is that common ground you can find with all people, and I think it's maybe more valuable to try and look for that than to try and have a pitchfork and say, it's maybe more valuable to try and find common ground, even with people who seriously disagree with.
But that's also the whole goal of comedy, right? Is to put all the bullshit aside and to be able to put things in perspective, to have a shared human experience that makes us all feel.
Yeah, we were talking about this today. Me and Troy Tesla, a South African comedian. Check him out on YouTube.
He's behind the camera.
But we were talking about this today. Is that the common human experience is that we were saying is one of the tragedies of comedy in South Africa. Yeah. Is that South Africa is quite a divided society.
Right.
People stick in their own little groups because apartheid did a number on us, and even now that it's gone, we still in a way act like it's not.
So I think there's harmony here. I do when I come here and when I do things, but then I've been at certain Vernac shows that I do feel like an outsider, and it feels difficult to come over the hump. Yeah. And then I was at a show last night where a very popular Vernac comedian came on, and I could feel this vibe where there was like 80% of the crowd that knew who he was loving it, whatever, and then the other 20% of the crowd had no clue. Idea who he was.
Like the English-speaking people at a Vernac comedy show, that's always quite a weird dynamic. You can have someone like Masha Bella does comedy in Sepedi. Yeah. And he's an icon.
And that was the show. Those were the shows that I was doing. Was I was the only one speaking English, and those were people.
So Masha Bella will do a set, and you've never seen a reaction like that. As in, people are literally falling out of their
throwing chairs,
people
punching
are going
each other,
crazy.
Yeah.
But then you'll see the small amount of people who don't speak the language in the audience are sitting there like, what the fuck is going on?
I'm
You
not
just
sure.
see this like almost panicked look on their faces.
Yeah. It's a weird. So,
but we were saying that because of that, and in Durban, where Troy is from, it's quite intense in terms of like you've got Zulu people,
Yeah.
so it's a Vernac crowd. Then you've got very quite English-speaking white people,
Yep.
and then you've got a Muslim, a very Indian audience, Hindu and Muslim mix. So you've got these pockets of crowds, and it's very rare that you find yourself performing to everyone.
Right, and so I mean, but again, this brings me back to like this is the goal of comedy, right? Is to find a universal truth.
And that's what I was saying. And I was talking about as a Jewish comedian, I once did a Jewish gig with a bunch of other Jewish comedians and one guy called Joey Rastin, who's like a well-known Muslim comedian.
Okay.
And he killed by far the most because he was the outsider, but he made an effort to understand. Like, for instance, he got on there and he had references and stuff that he had learned specially.
Yeah.
Like, before he went on, he was saying to me, like, am I saying this right?
Right,
and that sort of
right.
stuff. And I think there's something so powerful in going on stage and being, I'm not like you, but yet I am like you.
Right.
We're all human beings.
We're the same.
That's that human.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's to find that, to have that thing. And in South Africa, that thing can be quite powerful because of the fact that we are such a divided society and because we do judge each other so much based on like, I mean, that's why the hack sort of racial comedy was so big for a while here in terms of like, like black people do X, Y, and Z like this, but white people do X, Y, and Z like this.
So it's difficult.
And colored people do X, Y, and Z.
It's difficult to call it hack, right? Because you're sort of following in the shadow of scenes that have been doing comedy a lot longer, right? So your scene is only 26 years old. So by definition, for you to come into the scene and start doing things that maybe we were doing in America and like destroying for 30 years, and then now you come in, so it's like it's hack by association to comedy, but from the realm of like comedy started here. So it can only go from here to a certain place, right? So it's like it's not really.
So it is interesting to watch because we're such a new comedy industry. But
so like in a sense, it wasn't even hack for the first 20 years because you guys hadn't done it.
But what I do think is that someone has said, as a criticism of the South African comedy audience, is that they're not an audience who wants to laugh at themselves so much as an audience that wants to laugh at other people.
Sure.
At the other.
And I think that's where all comedy starts, though.
But I think that's something that really the best comedy doesn't do that. The best comedy makes everyone in the room feel like they have been through something you've been through on stage, even though you're completely different. You know,
yeah, that was.
Sense. Or like even when you're watching, what I love about comedy is that if you're watching someone like Doug Stanhope, now he might be someone who like drinks and smokes, and he's got that reputation of being like quite. And you might not be that kind of person, but when he's talking about his lifestyle and living like that, you can feel it. You can feel like what it would be like.
There
to
are
be
aspects, that you
so
can
it
relate
allows you
to.
to put yourself in other people's shoes.
Right.
You know.
Sure.
And I love that about it. And even like.
I remember the moments as a kid having something being said on a special that I'm watching, and I'm like, how does he know that I do that?
Yeah.
Like, that's how young of it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was just like, because I started watching comedy from like probably second grade, and so I was always watching. And to like be able to like get that we're all sort of the same and made it of the same materials was an interesting thing for me as a human.
Who was your first like comedy thing that you were exposed to?
I don't know. Well, this is funny because it was Tim Allen because it was the thing that I was like sharing with my father.
Tim the Tool Time Taylor.
Yeah, so he had two specials that came out right before he got that show.
Okay.
So that whole thing got beaten into the ground. But initially, like, it happened so fast and so quick, and it was such a specific moment in time that he like came up with this set, and it was brilliant. I mean, you look back at it, and it's not brilliant.
It's often like sitcoms, but are not just in terms of how they treat comedians. In terms of like, often the stand-up that comedians did before that sitcom will get ignored or forgotten.
Right.
And it often was very different to, like, for instance, for me, I've never seen his stand-up. All I've seen is Home Improvement. So it would be very hard for me.
So they took a tiny little element that was good for 30 minutes or good for an hour, and then they made 55,000 hours of it. You know what I mean? So it was like 12 seasons.
Yeah.
And so they took that one thing and then they wrote the shit out of it.
Yeah.
So like it's so just by the fact that he got a sitcom, it's hack now.
Yeah.
Just like we like make fun of this Jerry Seinfeld thing, like what's the deal with?
Yeah.
That was a working model that was like perfect for him when he started, and then they
and
blew
it kind of
apart
became
in
a
the
cliche,
show.
through him doing it in the show.
That's the problem. Is anything successful then becomes cliche in this business.
But like Bob Saget was an eye opener to me because obviously we grew up knowing him only as that home. As that what's it called?
Well, he got
Full House.
Full House. So he got a role having nothing to do with his stand-up.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing with like a Pee Wee Herman. Well, that's a very different story actually.
All I know Pee Wee Herman for is that doesn't he do kind of like creepy kids entertainment? But he was caught masturbating in a theater.
Basically, what happened was he was doing an anti-kids show, like in an adult and not G-rated way, and then somebody who had money was like, why don't you just do it like a real kids show? And he was like, cool, I guess I can do that. So he kind of sold out.
So it was started out as a sort of parody, as a sort of weird twisted parody.
It was like a live
show.
show where he was like a little filthy, a little dirty, because that's who he is. It was explicit. And then they like chopped those pieces off and made it into a kids show. And then of course he's jerking off in a movie theater.
What could go wrong?
Right.
This is terrible. That's a terrible idea on whoever's part.
Well, he made a bunch of money first.
Okay.
So it worked out. I don't know, but it's just like, is he selling out? And then now, now guys like Judd Apatow were in power. They gave him that show back on HBO, and they were trying to bring the whole thing back.
Which one?
They gave him an hour.
Who? Because Judd Apatow's in power, then Pee Wee got a new show.
So
Judd Apatow
put Pee Wee's show back on HBO.
Like the more filthy version.
The original
version. Okay. Yeah. So that he's been almost vindicated now.
Yeah, I mean, it's also been so long. And everyone that like was affected by the thing is now an adult.
So how long is it going to be until Louis C.K. is in that same situation?
That's funny. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, he's
it's going to have to happen at some stage.
He's hopping around. Rumor is he's hopping around getting spots in New York.
What, like small little rooms?
Just hopping in, just doing his thing, and he's starting to comment on things again on the internet.
And do you think he's? I mean, because my feeling is this: if you're Louis C.K. now, you get on stage, there's no way you can't start out by addressing what everyone's obviously thinking.
Right. So it's that moment. So
I'm sure he must start his set with addressing the masturbation stuff.
Sure.
He must. I mean, like.
Well, what's interesting is if you watch all of his sets, he's been addressing the masturbation stuff his entire career.
Oh yeah, no, exactly.
This is the one that really bothers me, is because he's the one who's been telling us who he is the whole time.
Yeah.
So like when it's a betrayal like Cosby, then you go, well, this is terrible. When it's Louis C.K., you go, he's been telling us the whole time that he jerks off onto people's dead bodies. Like that was one of his bits in his first special.
Yeah, that's true. But what's interesting about that for me is that he's got that bit about how, which is like was seen as quite a like pro-feminist bit, which was that he says, every time a woman goes on a date, it's kind of like going on a date with a half lion, half bear.
Thing you could do, right?
Half lion, half bear.
You know what he's gonna do,
and it's like you're like, I'm going on this date with this half lion, half bear, and you're like, maybe this one will be nice,
right?
And that's what he was saying. And what's interesting to me is that in the context of then, you thought maybe he was like making this like deep statement about how some men are, but when you think about it now, he actually was making a statement about himself. He wasn't saying he was any different.
He's got bits where he's talking about how women are like, well, I have fantasies too, and he's like, you don't understand the shit that's going on in my brain on constant loop. The shit that I have to bat away on constant loop.
But okay, so do you think it makes him more endearing and more forgivable because he is someone who's a bit more self-aware of his own problems? As someone like, well, I mean, obviously Bill Cosby's a bad example because Bill Cosby took it to a level where it's like clearly.
Well, Bill Cosby's not a bad example, right? Because that's the example that that Louis C.K. is being held. That's the standard he's being held to.
Yeah.
The punishment's the same.
Yeah. Well, in terms of their
drugging
career.
someone, knocking them out, and then having sex with them is
now
the
in
same as standing in the corner asking for permission and then not waiting long enough to get it.
Yeah.
The punishment's the same. And we're viewing them in the same place, and I think that's the problem.
And I think that's what Bill Burr said, and I think that's I mean, Bill Burr's in that space where he can say things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, the punishment is the same, which is, I mean, look, obviously what he was involved in is not anything that we aspire to, right? It's nothing that we want people to want to be involved in or to do, or we don't want our wives or sisters or mothers or daughters to be in that situation.
Yeah.
But as far as apologies go, this man took responsibility for his actions.
Yeah.
Tried to give so much of himself to apologize to these people. Say that the position that he was in, he abused.
And you are right that in a only slightly coded way, he was addressing it the whole time on stage, which is insane. But I mean, that's to me the insane thing about Bill Cosby is when you look at that and there's that thing of like, no matter how many women come forward, he's going to the grave saying that he never did any of it. You know what I'm saying? And that's that thing that I can't wrap my head around. And also the more interesting fact that his wife is going to the grave as well.
Well, no, supposedly she bailed. She's out.
Is she out now?
Yeah, she's
took her long enough. She
left.
released like lots of letters like defending him.
Yeah,
beforehand.
once the actual what is it, not the sentencing, but once they called him guilty, she left.
Did she?
Yeah. And
I guess everyone has a breaking point.
Yeah. So I think he's just still. I mean, I've been in South Africa.
I think that seems like too little, too late, if I may say so. It's like this guy's been doing this stuff for like 40 years, and you stand by his side, and then
until the guilty verdict. Yeah.
You're like,
and they go, well, this isn't going to go good anymore.
I guess I was wrong about you all along.
Yeah. Yeah,
Shame,
no,
man.
you're not wrong. I mean, and so he's sort of alone now and sort of begging for her.
And then Aziz Ansari was an interesting one to me, because then that was like an almost. He, for a day, was looking like he was going to be the next Louis C.K. And then within days, people were like, this is actually nonsense. Well, I think what happened is that with every case, it was almost hard to, it was almost unacceptable, the idea that you would write a think piece saying, well, what he did actually wasn't that bad.
Right.
Until Aziz Ansari's story came along, because a lot of prominent feminists said, this is taking the Me Too movement too far, because if you read the woman's account, all she's saying basically is that he couldn't read signals well enough. And for a feminist, often you believe very much that agency is important, and that taking control of the situation is important. And many were offended at the idea that this woman wouldn't be more forceful in saying this is not working,
and wouldn't communicate
properly, and wouldn't leave,
Right.
And so the fact that she didn't the whole time and felt uncomfortable afterwards, some questioned, we're not saying that he's a good lover, we're not saying that he's a nice person, but is it on that level? No, it's not. And I think enough people said that for it to be quite clear that it wasn't going to end his career.
Yeah.
That's my take on it. I don't know.
He's been sort of like quiet in the whole thing as well. So that.
I mean, it's hard. I think what was hard about him and Louis C.K. is because those were the first two people who were accused who had reputations of being very much had a good guy persona in terms of like feminists were like, this guy's an ally, speaking about that stuff a lot. I mean, it's like.
Was he? Would you say Louis C.K. was a feminist ally?
I would, because both of them had, like, for instance, on Master of None, which is Aziz's show, he had an episode where it was about a woman being followed home, about how common it is for women to be followed home, and like that fear, and how different it is as a man. So that's like, to put an episode together like that puts you in that camp of being an ally. And it seems quite Louis C.K. I would say as well, because he had quite a few, like there was that episode of Louis where there was that overweight sort of woman who he ends up on a date with, and she ends up making this really strong monologue about how superficial men are, and how they can't, and it's stuff like that. And then also like quite a few episodes where he kind of, because that's Louis C.K.'s thing, is he kind of confronts racism in a way of like, this is bad, but I'm almost guilty. I'm guilty of it too. His comedy's never like, this is what they are doing. He's like, he takes the
responsibility.
ownership. And he did that a lot in his show in a way that a lot of prominent feminists were like, no, this guy is speaking the truth. So he definitely was someone seen as an ally, and especially that bit of like half lion, half bear. That's what men are.
Yeah.
It seemed quite progressive to be like embracing that.
And there was a lot. There really was. There was a lot of those where it was sort of admitting that there's this animal quality to men that is terrible.
Yeah, and recognizing how horrible that must be from a woman's perspective.
Right, and that even as a man fighting against it is like a challenge on a daily basis.
Yeah,
this thing about like the PSI, like get a little PSI out of the genitals. You know what I mean? Just let a little PSI out, or the thing's gonna explode. So yeah.
Man, so what an interesting guy, and how interesting that, I mean, just the fact that we've spoken about him this long means, and the fact that you say he's hopping up all over New York and stuff like that, I think it's just a few years away from when he starts making his, and it's interesting about art because but like R. Kelly or someone like that has consistently made music. It's
I think the public is finally over with R. Kelly, really, because something else recently came out about R. Kelly. But R. Kelly was kind
of like he had a harem, like he was keeping all of these women against, like people called it a sex cult.
He was like
a sex cult.
Yeah, he like mind fucked a bunch of people.
Yeah, and then he was a sex cult, but all the women in the sex cult were like there willingly, but all their parents were like, call the police.
Right.
We got to get our little girl back or something like that.
Yeah, I've used R. Kelly as an example in my comedy for years about this idea that like, as men, we don't want to cross the line too far. We don't want to get to that R. Kelly place. Like we all have that possibility
but
that we do too many things in sex that our appetites can't handle it, and that we now need a whole new arsenal of things to even have an orgasm.
But he's also one of the most. Oh, that's true. And that's the internet's fault as well.
Right.
But he's also...
Is everything that we add to it is now can't be removed.
Yeah. Yeah, and you build one of these layers of
Right.
filth. And
Right.
then how do you strip down the layers of filth? You can't. You can
can't
add
do
to
it.
them, but
Right.
you can't subtract.
Right.
It's terrible.
Right.
But what was I just saying? I was saying with R. Kelly, he is also insanely talented, and I find there is that sense of like, there's people who are gonna buy his album. No
He's
matter
still
what.
gonna the love. What's the love slide? The love. What's the damn? What's
the
the
love? What was that
the
album
song,
called?
The song where you can do a dance line. He's got a song.
Oh, you
the
got
love slide. Is it the love slide? Anyway, every black wedding has the love slide.
Troy
in it,
Tesla.
No matter how
What's
many.
that song that R.
The love
Kelly
slide?
does when people dance in a line? Is it called the Love Slide?
Step in the name of love. This one. Yeah.
7 Day
Step,
Love.
step. I think it's the love slide.
Love slide. Ooh, we're not.
Oh, so by the way,
I know that
Deep Fried Man is a musical comedian that we should have been doing this the whole time.
I know you're a dodgy guy, R. Kelly, but I'm still sorry that we butchered your song like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't fair of
That's
us.
funny. Yeah, it is. It's the element of talent. It's the element. It's a lot of things.
But like with Harvey Weinstein, it's like you can't get away with that shit if you're a producer because
You have no talent.
Because essentially all you're doing is
This is interesting.
leveraging
Yeah,
other people's talents.
now we're taking a weird perspective on it, where we're basically just saying as long as you're talented, you can rape people, which I don't think is how either of us feel.
No, I don't think we're saying it's right that that's the case, but I think we're saying that it's interesting who gets completely destroyed in their career.
It's just tough.
And who gets to carry on. But
I think the bigger discussion is what do you do to someone's work of art once we find out who they are as a human being?
And that's very tough because I had a thing recently where I heard a song by Mark Ronson. We had gotten Mystical on the track. And Mystical is the rapper who's probably best known for Shake Your Ass, Watch Yourself.
Yeah, we know, yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that was, but then I was like, where's Mystical been? Then I heard this track with Mark Ronson. One of the best tracks I've ever heard, man. It's called Feel Right, and it's got like a James Brown feel. And on it, you know like how Mark Ronson does that sort of old soul sound so well.
Yeah.
So it sounds like an old James Brown song.
He's just borrowing, yeah.
And then Mystical raps on it, but he raps like the James Brown of rap. So it's got this like sense of like you can picture him on stage with like a whole 8-piece soul band with like the 3 shoe-up singers and all that. You know, it was so well done. And I was like listening to the song.
Which of those people do you not respect?
Wait. So then I decided. So then I decided now I must Google what's happened to Mystical because how has he just been off the scene for so long?
Yeah.
I Googled him. Turns out the reason why he'd been gone for so long is because he went to jail. And the reason why he went to jail is because there was video footage of him and a bodyguard raping his the person who used to be the fashion woman on his tour.
Yeah. Who would dress him.
At gunpoint, allegedly in retribution for her owing him money.
Oh.
And so now I'm like listening to the song, and it still sounds amazing to me.
Right.
And I want to not like it, but it's so hard.
Right. It's that
so
moment.
hard.
Yeah. It's that. How do we separate it? How do we separate it?
Yeah.
How do we
And
the
the
Roman
separating-
Polanski thing? It's all the things.
And
It's like
because do you know what the thing is? If you take it too far, you have to basically stop liking everything. Because if you're gonna like, for instance, I remember there was a think piece where they said now everything Harvey Weinstein produced is basically cancelled now.
Right.
But that's 20 years worth of Oscar-winning movies. That's like every movie that won an Oscar.
We're like
the 90s.
there's one thing, and this is the other problem is, and then this
That's Pulp Fiction.
This brings in this larger discussion, which is like, do you need to also be a sociopath to be a genius?
Yeah, is
as an
that
artist?
sense of it? Is there that sense of it? Because it goes back because, society was not always as, society was quite permissive at a certain stage. And I know, like, for instance, there's guys like Gauguin, the artist, was very well known as being like a bit of a pedophile. Like, he went and he lived in this island in the Philippines and like, had like 12-year-old wives.
Gauguin is what? Impressionism, right? No, he's surrealism.
No, it was... I get confused between abstract expressionism and impressionism. He was impressionism.
Right, in between those. So
Impressionism is when it's like a very naive way of painting actual things. So he would do these like island women, the women that he lived with in the Philippines, he would do these very like naive paintings.
Right. So my only argument there is that sort of everything was sort of pedophilic.
Yeah, I mean,
until recently.
That is true. It's like there was a time when you would marry 12-year-olds. Yeah, exactly. There was that time. Yeah.
So the good old days. But you know what I mean? It's like
these woke kids of today. Now you can't even marry a 12-year-old without getting into trouble on Twitter.
So that's my only argument there. I mean, we can't compare.
I just realized you could separate just that clip out of context,
right,
and make me look so bad.
No, I think everybody knows clearly that, that something funny has happened.
Okay, I hope so.
But again, that's sort of that. Then maybe that brings us to the overall big point about comedy and the whole thing where we started, which is this idea that like everything is allowed to be funny in the right context, and so once we build in that context, then we get to talk about it.
Yeah,
but comedy comes from dark shit.
But I do think so, but I think sometimes people make the mistake of being outraged at not.
Oh, you can't joke about that.
But also, they're not outraged at the joke. They're outraged at what the joke is about.
You're not allowed to joke about that.
Yeah. And
you're like, yeah, but did you hear it? Did you hear the fucking joke?
But that's hard as well because people's level of understanding of things like satire and sarcasm, those are things where you don't always say what you mean. You know, sometimes you say the opposite of what you mean.
This is the problem, and this is how I try to put it. Is like the audience is sort of at like first year funny. And so our whole job every year after we're past first year funny, our whole job is to figure out how to go get them and bring them up to speed to where we're at. And that's the whole framing, is bringing them to the place where they understand where we're coming from, because we don't look at the world how first year funny guys look at the world.
Did you see that Vice documentary? There was a Vice documentary recently about comedy on campuses in America.
No.
And how comedians, like the big comedians like Chris Rock and guys like that, have straight up said, "I'm not." Well,
this was the big thing in the last 4 or 5 years was Jerry Seinfeld saying, "I don't play colleges because it's too PC."
Yeah, exactly. And then there's this Vice documentary about it.
But at the same time, I'm going, listen, Jerry Seinfeld, you don't play colleges because they can't afford you.
Yes, there's that as well. But also I'm thinking, like, what is Jerry Seinfeld saying which is un-PC?
Right. That's the other thing. So it's like, so he can say whatever he wants about these places that he's not playing, but it's like he's not playing those because it's not a $1 million gig.
They were super offended about his bit about how muffins are overrated. I don't know.
Right. I don't.
But it was interesting because this Vice documentary is from the perspective of the comedians who are being booked at this point to do like the spring, what are those called? That week where you'd have a lot of comedians.
Not ASCAP, but the other one.
But that week where you'd have lots of comedians. And it is this case of like, now you sit down, there's 3 people. One of them is an intersectional feminist lecturer. The other one is like, and there's all these guys, and they're telling you exactly what you can and can't say. Right. And you're busy sitting there thinking like, how am I going to? Yeah,
they told us once if we talked about race, and they would, or they said if we said anything that they didn't like, they would pull the mics. And this was on, and there's Giannis Pappas, who's very, very successful now. Nate Bargatze, who's very successful now.
I love that. Myself. It's not like we won't pay you. It's not like we won't invite you back. It's just like we'll pull the mic.
Well, I think the assumption was that they wouldn't pay us also. Either, but it's like, but then we're on guard the whole show, and it's like we don't even know what they didn't even give us guidelines. Yeah. They just said we'll pull the mics if we don't like it. Yeah. And this is the teachers. Now we're crushing with the students, and this is just 2 administrators in the back.
That's the thing I was going to say. Is it's often really bad when you think about the fact that I know this audience is going to like my bit about XYZ, but because the person is booking me says no XYZ as a topic, that means even a one where I'm putting it in quite a, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, this is a horrible analogy, but this is the one I'm going to use. Is I had a lady stay in my apartment for an Airbnb, and her son booked it, and so she came to the Airbnb. My roommate was a slob at the time. He had left the place a mess, so she came, had to clean the place, and then had to tell her son who booked the thing. So the review that he left me, through the eyes of his mother, was so much worse because he never had to live in the house. So he basically had to listen to his mother complain to him about how dirty the place was, and then he translated and made it so much. He took the human element out of it because he didn't have to experience the thing. So now he's coming from. If she had to write the review, she would have given some levity to it. Yeah. Should have been like, I understand where you're coming from. And then once you take another step out, then it's all removed. So now you're the person hearing about what happened to the comedy show, and you're the administrator.
Have that sense of who's saying it, who's
right. You weren't in the room. Yeah. And you're just hearing the joke now, translated from the person who was offended by it. So they're fucking up the joke. They're like, I don't know, he just came out and called everybody Marisol and then left. Like, it's like,
But it was in this documentary, it was quite, because it was sad. It was like a lot of the like people who booked the comedy were saying like, the students in our campus today, they really need to feel like they're in a space which is very safe and very warm, where none of their ideas will be challenged, etc., and where everything will be perfectly according. And I'm just like, that's not what comedy's
opposite.
for.
That's also the opposite of what college is for.
And that's not what college is for either. Yeah, so that's sad. That's sad as a 37-year-old.
Are you 37?
Oh shit! No, I'm joking. I'm 24.
Book me. I'm 24. No, but
the kids love me. The kids of today.
We're starting. So we're very close to showtime, and they're starting to like turn the trap music up.
Migos, huge fan.
Louder and louder.
I love that thing they do in the songs where they go whoopity whoop.
So I appreciate you and your time. This is Deep Fried Man. Tell them how to follow you and such and so forth on the internet.
You can get it's at Deep Fried Man, one word, no underscores or no nothing. Deep Fried Man. The way you usually spell Deep Fried Man.
And this is Instagram.
On Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook, you could just search for Deep Fried Man.
You guys don't really. They don't. I found this out. They don't really fuck with Snapchat the way we do in the U.S.
Kids do. Yeah. Like there's a certain amount of like kids, like people my brother's age. My brother's got a younger brother who's like 19. And and he used to. Even he now he's like, nah.
I still love Snapchat, but there's something. Yeah, there's something about the culture here where nobody's into.
No one's into Snapchat. Yeah.
So don't snap him.
Don't snap me. And there was a time when it looked like it could catch on, but do you know what the thing is? Don't you feel like sometimes that it's like if someone were to say tomorrow there's this new amazing social media, you'd be like, I can't fucking do another one.
I don't have any more time.
How am I supposed to do all these different things?
I think that isn't that happening? That's happened.
In a way, it's like now you got to think like I've got this thing on Twitter. Now do I do that automatic thing so that it goes instantly to Facebook at the same time? Or things like that. Instagram.
This is a very hard life for us.
I'm really bad at Instagram. I'm suck at Instagram. Yeah? I get so sad at how few likes I get on Instagram. I don't know what it is. Yeah. Or what I'm doing wrong.
I'm just now starting to almost figure it out. I'm starting to sort of see an arc of like of the peak of where I can get to. It's like I know what a really good post is now and what a shitty post is now.
I really, really don't. All I know is that the only way for me to get likes is to post cute pictures of my son.
That'll work.
Yeah.
That'll work for the whole time.
People will be like, this comedian must be amazing. His entire life revolves around taking photos of his son.
Yeah, it was interesting. So there was a point in time where I was only taking pictures of my food and my dog, and I was like, well, this doesn't help my comedy at all.
Yeah. I think you need to leverage the dog and food pictures with pictures of you on stage.
Right.
But you have to understand the pictures of you on stage will probably get the least likes.
Yeah. Oh, my dog crushes most of the likes. Yeah.
But the stage ones, it's hard to get right. It's like if you see someone in like in Radio Music City Hall, standing there with a perfect selfie of the entire audience behind them, that's gonna get like a lot of likes. But like when it's like the back of the venue and you're a little dot at the front.
You didn't get any Boxburg likes?
No one gets likes for being in Boxburg. They should actually have an unlike function on Instagram. Just
well, no, it's like now I'm leaving Boxburg, and then that should get the likes. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this interview. This is the Comedy's Best Kept Secret Tour podcast. We're on iTunes, we're on Google Play. Yeah. We're on, I don't know, the other things like Podbean and whatnot. We got some YouTube footage today. Wherever you found us, we're on the other thing. Whether you're Android or Apple friendly, we're there. Keep listening to us. I got 4 weeks here in South Africa. I'm going to interview everybody that I think is important and relevant in the area. So sorry, Troy. I'm just kidding. We're going to get Troy Tesla on in a later episode. Look out for him.
What did he say? He said something along the lines of I'm relevant to myself or something like that. My mom thinks I'm relative. Sorry? I'm relevant elsewhere.
Thank you guys for listening.
I'm relevant in Japan.